There's a river. Let's see what he had. Aces. Alright, he had aces, guys. Ends up stacking off to me when he had me completely dominated pre-flop. Let's look at that with the cards shown. This shows you the equities here. I've got 18%. This guy's actually got 22. Forgive me, 82% more or less. Not shown probably because the other player here. Let's see. Yeah, and now you see the reason why you shouldn't just min raise flat. Let's say he's looking for, you know, when he min raises here, this guy flats, I re-raise, he should automatically shove, or at least 4-bet. At least 4-bet here, because he doesn't want this guy hanging out with any kind of pocket pair. He doesn't want me hanging out with any kind of suited connector, maybe squeeze, 3-bet squeezing light. Right? And that's, again, this is why these reversed implied odds are so strong with these big hands, guys. And I would just, as a general rule, especially for those of you who are getting started, just, you know, raise those up in general. Raise them up. If you can get it all in pre-flop, you're happy. You're going to get it in on average at 80% ahead of your opposition. Why not? Now, he only flats, and yeah, get sucked out real hard. But if he had, okay, in this case, of course, with my kings, I'm playing for stacks anyways, but I'm not going to have this hand a lot. And when he 4-bets me, I'm probably going to let that go, right? In many cases. Doesn't do it. You know, he lets me draw cheaply. And I check raise, get it all in at 90% equity, and end up taking it down. The money that stays in the middle here, guys, is the rake that is taken from every pot. So let's talk about a few key statistics that I think are pretty unknown. It's common knowledge among expert and professional players, but they're pretty unknown, I think, against the general player out there, especially online. And what I've done is basically taken a few of your very standard hands and wanted to show you guys what the mathematical truth is of hitting flops. So the typical big slick here suited, ace king suited, you're gonna receive that hand dealt one time in 332 total hands you play. So not a hell of a lot. Now the odds of flopping either an ace or a king, or let's say at least an ace or a king, is only 32.4%, more or less, one time in 3. So that means both you and your opposition, if they're on non-pocket pairs, will miss that flop 2 times in 3. Right, 66% of the time. Realize that. Play with that. That's the power also of the C-bet. You guys should definitely check that out, right? 1 time in 3 you're going to hit, 2 times in 3 you're going to miss with this hand. That's how it is. Only 1 in 29 flop 2 pair or better. So 1 in 29 flops you're going to have 2 pair or better when you're holding ace king suited pre-flop. This is the big number that I want you guys to look at. 1 in 9 flops a flush draw. Okay, not a flush draw. It's about 11%. Okay. Remember this number, this 9 number. How often will you flop a flush when you're holding any 2 suited cards? Doesn't matter which. 1 time in 119 flops will you flop the flush. Just highly unlikely, guys. So again, these weak ranked cards, even though they're suited, don't even fool with it. You know, and especially when you're out of position. A lot of times, if you don't have post flop lines where you can push your opponents off of their hands, it's really risky business, because you're only going to flop that big flush 118 to 1 against. You will hit the flush draw 1 time in 9 approximately. Good. Pocket pairs will be dealt 1 time in 17 deals. That means 5.88% of the time you're going to have a pocket pair, any pocket pair from 2s to aces, when you check your hole cards. Alright, what are the odds of flopping a set or better? As I just mentioned, basically 7.5 to 1 against. So you will hit a set or better. That means it's example, you hold a pair of 5s, the 5 then comes on the flop. Exactly flopping that set is also right at 11%, so 1 time in 9. However, you're also going to play on when you flop a full house or a 4 of a kind, which are highly unlikely. But you know, this is the real number you need to know. 7.5 to 1 against. So 1 time in 8.5, you're going to hit. Ergo, flatting or cold calling as a set mining move can be done when you have, or the effective stack size, say, is more or less 9 times the amount that you have to call. So you basically, when you have those pocket pairs from 2s to 10s again, then you're looking for that third rank of that pair, and that's going to come about 1 time in 9, more or less. There you go. As long as your opponent and you, right, have at least 9 times the amount to call, it's doable. It's doable. Then there's the adage, no set, no bet, if you do have the underpair. No set, no bet. With the set, you're probably going to get the other guy to stack off, depending on his playing style. Very good. Now, 1 in 5 pocket pairs hits the set by the river. Also important number. You're going to see that a lot. You've probably seen it watching the World Series of Poker, stuff like that on TV, where they show the equity matchups, the win chances in the player screen, so to say. And yeah, you see that number quite a lot, right, with these underpairs versus overpairs. The reason is more or less this. It depends a bit on the suits. Yeah, whatever, but yeah, on average, that's what you're looking at. Good. Max stretch suited connectors already defined at 54 to Jack 10. And look at this. You're going to flop the open-ended straight draw, also about 1 time in 9, more or less. Now, you're only going to flop the straight with a max stretch. That means non-gap. Max stretch 54 to the Jack 10. 1 time in 76.5. So it's more or less 75 to 1 against you flopping a straight. 118 to 1 against flopping a flush when you hold 2 suited cards. Welcome to the bitter truth of mathematical plays here. You're not going to flop that flush very often. When you do, do the happy dance. But don't bank on it. Alright? You're not going to flop that straight, even with a non-gapper, but 1 time in 76, 77 pulls. So again, when you do happy dance time, why not? What's the difference? Well, suited hands and your max stretch connectors, right? And of course the max stretch can also be suited, but we're just looking at this as an offsuit connector max stretch and a 82 suited cards. When you do hit that flop, right, when you get a piece of it, you're going to be flopping more often than not the draw when you're holding suited cards, and you're going to be flopping more often than not the draw when you're holding your connectors. Whereas when you're holding your pocket pairs and you hit hard at approximately the same percentage of the time, you're going to have a mate hand and a monster hand, because your set against even top pair, top kicker is upwards of 95% ahead of any top pair like that. So yet again, one of our best friends, Poker Stove. It is again provided for free. And let's say we've got our fivesies, which was the example I believe I was speaking of. And our friend has the old big slick suited. Ace King suited. Alright, what's the pre-flop matchup? Well, as a principle, guys, anytime you've got a pair and somebody's got 2 overcards, in general, the matchup is about 55 to 45%. There's about a 10% difference here. If it's suited, it's a bit closer. Let's see exactly what they put. Yeah, so this is okay. So he's suited, so he's a bit closer at 52 to 48, and this is a typical coin toss that you guys talk about all the time. Let's look at Ace King offsuit, and there you go. Yeah, about 55, right? So that's the difference pre-flop. So again, you're flipping. Let's say the board comes 5. Okay, let's make this exact. 5 of diamonds, 5 of hearts, Ace of spades, King of spades. Very good. Let's reevaluate that with the exact suits here. So we don't have any suits blocking this guy. Makes it a bit better. Flop comes 5 of spades, 6 of hearts, why not, and the King of hearts. No, King of diamonds, just to make it a rainbow board. Boom, there you go. This guy flops exactly what he's looking for. He's got top pair, top kicker on a rainbow board. He thinks he's good, right? Wrong. He has only 5.56% equity to the river versus that flop set. Pretty sick, guys. So just understand that this flop set is very, very powerful. Something else I want to show you is this. Let's go ahead and assume that he's also on top pair, top kicker plus the nut flush draw. That does help quite a bit, right? He's up to 30%, but let's say The next card comes and it's a king of hearts. King of hearts, right? So he's now tripped up. The ace king is now tripped up on this board, and he's again, this guy's probably doing the happy dance right now on the turn, right? Wow. Now he's only got 16% to the river, right? Because now I'm full. Right, I've got fives full of kings, and he's still got the nut flush draw in his mind, plus the best set and best kicker, or best trip, say. Yeah, top pair, top kicker, guys. Those are the hands that you stack off with quite a lot. You know, when you run into this kind of stuff, just be aware of it. It's going to happen definitely in the sessions that you'll see from me in the near future. I'm sure we'll stack off more than once versus sets. It's just part of the game. Remember the principle that we'll get into here shortly. Big pots with big hands, small pots with small hands. And, you know, top pair, top kicker is a good hand. It's not a big hand. Big hands are two pair or better. I want you guys to realize that. Alright, so another one here. We've got fives versus a 78 suited, let's say. Now that's a really, really close matchup, right? 78 suited versus the fives. Pre-flop, more or less 1-to-1. Here comes a flop, 5-6, king of diamonds, 2 suited, which also happen to be the suits of the max stretch connector here. Okay, now my set is markedly worse than the top pair, top kicker versus this guy who didn't even hit a pair. He's got an open and a straight draw for the 5, 6, 7, 8, and he's got then the full 9 clean outs for the flush, giving him 42% on the flop. 42% on the flop with his draw alone versus my flop set. Pretty intense, right? Let's say the same card comes, I think it was a king of hearts, and now all of a sudden it really turns, right? Because I've got the full house, and this guy has essentially only the straight flush draw remaining. Let's look at the 9 of hearts, which I would consider a blank given my hand, right? Because I don't put this guy on the 78 necessarily. Wow. Now I've got my set of fives, and I probably push on that turn to protect against a flush draw. However, this guy has completed his straight, is about 80% ahead of me. These are things you guys need to be aware of. These kind of hands will be raised and re-raised, especially in 6 max play. The other thing is too, you know, this top pair, top kicker, if you do the happy dance too soon and you see a couple of low cards on that flop, just at least as a bare minimum, have the set in your mind. Have, you know, the connecting cards in your mind. Have the potential flush draws in your mind, and utilize all that knowledge to your advantage. And also, in many cases, you want to be playing your ace kings, you know, when you flop that top pair, top kicker, for pot control, as sick as it sounds. Let's say here, kings. Yeah, I mean, best case scenario, when you flop top pair, top kicker, and the nut flush draw, you're still 70% behind a flop flush or flop set. That's the truth of it, guys. So again, top pair, top kicker, it's a good hand. It's not necessarily a big hand. Big hands are 2 pair or better. So concerning betting, let's keep it simple. If you're taking notes, the limp is going to be indicated with a big L. Flatting is going to be CC or cold calling. 3x, right? You want to 3 times the raise behind you. You want to 3 time it. That's indicated as an R, and OR would then be an open raise. Or you're simply going to push and fold, right? Depending on your pot to stack ratio, depending on bet size to effective stack ratio, stuff like that. Alright, something that's also not so well known out there, my experience both in casinos and general house games around the world, is this idea of a pot raise. Okay, it is not necessarily just betting the pot amount. The actual raise formula, and it's very important for you pot limit Omaha or future pot limit Omaha players out there, it's the pot, it's the current pot plus 2 times the amount you need to call. So I've given you guys a couple of examples here. Let's say we're playing an NL 100 just to make it simple, right? So small blind's 50, big blind is $1, and that's how it is. So we've got 1.5 for the blinds. Alright, 1 is your call amount. And if you want to raise it up pot size, you're going to raise it to, right, the amount The amount of the pot, 1.5 plus 2 to call, and that's 3.5 big blinds. Alright, let's say you get flatted, flop comes, and the pot is now $8. Alright, small blind bets it out for 6 big blinds, or $6 in our example. My pot size raise is going to be the 8 plus the 6, giving me the total pot size of 14, plus twice the amount to call for 12, i.e. 26. What does this do? Why would you want to make a pot size bet? Well, because you know exactly the odds, the pot odds that you're giving your opponent, namely 2 to 1. When your opponent's getting 2 to 1 pot odds, because of your pot size raise, then he needs, as I've written here, 33% equity if he's going to call all in. And yeah, you guys definitely need to look at drawing odds, completion odds for the no limit hold'em game. If you're unfamiliar with that, you can find it at Wikipedia. And yeah, definitely have a look at that. But if you're on a flush draw on the flop in general, right, you're only going to hit it exactly at 34.97% of the time. If you're on an open-ended straight draw, right at 31.45%, etc., you know, call it more or less 32% on average for any open-ended straight draw and even any flush draw. And yeah, that's going to be right at the equity needed to make that call. So that's going all in on the flop, right? And in general, you're only going to have 19%, you know, to complete your flush draw on any given card coming into either the turn or the river. And yeah, that's kind of the idea there, guys, with these pot size raises. You know exactly that your opponent's getting 2 to 1 odds and that he needs 33% equity with any holding to break even if calling all in. Good. And again, with our keeping it simple here for betting, you know, on most dry boards, when I say a dry board, guys, in the sessions, it's going to be when there's 3 cards of different suits. Okay, so it's going to be a so-called rainbow board and relatively unconnected board concerning the ranks. So about half pot on those kind of dry boards and 2/3 to 3/4 pot on the wet boards. It means 2 suited, connected board, stuff like that. And quick side note, approximately 60% of all the flops that you'll see will be 2 suited. So by and large, you're going to be either drawing to the flush or worried about the flush. And so just, yeah, it's also a good number to have in mind. You know, about 60% of all flops will have 2 suits. Something to keep your eye on just to test that out. All right, here we go. A little recommendation. We've got here call 9x. That's the rule. With 2s to 10 for so-called set value. And again, be very, very aware that you have 9 times in the effective stack size, and that may be the stack size of your opponent when you're making that call. All right, that's kind of the prerequisite for that. Concerning the implied odds, and then here I've got this call 15 when in position with suited connectors and suited ace-x hands. Okay, so you can either call when you have 15 times the amount to call, or you can 3-bet it, right? You can change it up. You of course can fold, and yeah, everything's at your disposal. But with the suited connectors, you by and large want to be playing in position after multiple callers or multiple limpers, because as I just indicated, I think in a slide or two ago, when you hit with your suited hands or your connected hands, it's very often going to be a draw, not a made hand. So then you're going to have to, you know, deal with c-bets on the flop, maybe even the turn. And you know, if these guys are good, they're not going to give you the odds to draw. So, you know, when you're calling those in position, yeah, about 15 times the amount to call should be enough to get you there, yeah, EV wise in the long run, especially if your opponents are able to stack off again with top pair, top kicker, and other holdings. All right, so here we go. Betting continued. If a bet, a raise, or a call is greater than or equal to 50% of your stack, or by making that bet, raise or call, you will be pot committed on the next betting round. And this is generally when your stack is less than or equal to the pot. Then you're going to push or fold directly. That's what I've coined in other videos that I've done, Essential Poker Knowledge videos, the golden rule of betting. All right, so it's you know, of course, well-known fact among experts, advanced players, but yeah, many new players who just play poker for fun, which may include a lot of you guys out there. You know, there's nothing wrong with playing cards for fun, man, and enjoying it. But when you have these different rules, just general principles, right? Your game will skyrocket. And one of them here is, again, this golden rule of betting, and that's basically not just fooling around with little min bets and min raises and stuff like that. If you're going to make a bet, raise or call, and it's going to commit more than half of your stack, you're not asking yourself, should I call this? And you're saying, okay, is this a push or a fold spot? And that's pretty much how you play it. All right, again, mind the pot to the effective stack ratio. And I showed you guys in the one example hand where I was playing, the effective stack size, not my stack size, which was bigger deep stack. Good. And you always, again, want to put the final question to your opponents. Keep the initiative and so-called fear and fold equity on your side. Another quick tip: if it's good enough for a call, it's often good enough for a raise. Again, without borrowing speculative hands in position after 2 or more numbers of cold callers. Final point here: pushing or jamming. That means going all in. Okay. You'll hear me say push. You'll hear me say shove. You'll hear me say jam it. All means the same. It's basically just putting everything that you've got in front of you across the line, going all in, and that's going to give you the maximum amount of fold equity. And also, if you can shove, and you think that, let's say for example, your opposition maybe has, maybe your opposition's a bit more skilled post flop, and you're worried about them kind of shoving you off of hands. One of the best defenses you have is actually pushing. That means if you can get in pre flop with a premium hand, you don't have to worry about one of these guys sucking out on you, maybe floating you, stuff like that, outplaying you post flop, pushing you off of hands. If you can shove with the best of it, you can basically write off any skill differences that might be there, i.e. the edge that certain players have post flop, by pushing or jamming pre flop. That's also a really good tip for a lot of beginning and rec players. And as I've been seeing here in these approximately 10,000 hands at the Storm tables now, there are a lot of guys who buy in for that minimum stack size of 30 big blinds, and they're doing exactly this. Right? They're playing. Some of them are playing a really effective, I think, mid-stack strategy, and you're going to see a lot of that shoving going on, right? For small mid stacks, and it's something that I want to use my pot odds calculator to show you exactly how you can react to that. We'll get there, I think, in a slide or two. Moving right along, we've got here tips and tricks. Number 1 for Storm Poker and also for poker in general. The Dylan Pip principle here. That is position plus initiative equals profit. Alright, I want you guys to be focusing on in position play as much as you can. Make the first aggressive move. Make the last aggressive move. Do it from the button very often. Be in position as often as you can. Keep that initiative on your side. Put the pressure on your opponents, not the other way around. So here we go. With the small mid pockets versus early position, mid position, pre-flop raisers, you should try to set mine in general rather than 3-betting. Okay, especially when, for example, in the Storm poker tables, the HUD, the heads-up display for Hold'em Manager, it at this point doesn't function. I just got a response back from those guys, and they're looking for a solution. But as of now, we can't use the HUD actively in real-time play. So we can use it after the fact, of course, analyzing hands, but as a decision enhancer in real time, it's unfortunately not set up for that. So again, consider EP and MP raisers relatively, again, it depends on the opponent, but it's going to be a stronger hand in general from early position than it will be from middle position, than it will be from the cutoff, than it will be from the button. So that's, as a general rule, just know that. So if you got a small mid pocket, you don't necessarily want to go raising over the top, right? Setting yourself up, for example, somebody with queens or better who then 4-bets you, and you're sitting there with your pair of 5s and saying, oh shit, I probably should have just flatted, and checked out the flop for relatively cheap, and set mine, so to say. I'm looking for the 5, no set, no bet, and get out cheaply. So you got those crazy implied odds that I just showed you in Poker Stove when you do hit your set versus top pair, top kicker kind of hands, and you're also ahead of 15 card draws, and you're you're just super strong with that set, that flop set. So that's going to be one of our best friends probably for big pot play, and that's something we'll be focusing on. But definitely, guys, pit principle, position plus initiative equals profit. Last point here, big tip: do not call a turn bet. if you're not willing to call a large river bet or even a shove or a push from your opponent. So that means if you're on the turn's really the turning point, so to say, in most hands, and that means am I playing for stacks here or not, depending on the previous action. But yeah, if it's a big bet on the turn, don't just flat if you're not willing to call another bet on the river. You can do so, however, if you're getting the pot odds for your draw, and you know that there's implied odds after the fact. That means you can even make in some cases, calls where you don't have direct odds to make that call giving your draw, but you do have the implied odds, meaning that when you do hit, you can basically bank on your opponent shoving over the rest of his stack to your side of the table. And that's these are also different ideas that you should definitely have in your mind. But in general, don't call the turn if you're not willing to call a large river bet. The worst thing you can do is make a call on any given street just to let it go on the next, without again the implied odds to do so. Good. So low stakes, guys. Tips and tricks 2. Reduce continued aggression in general if your opponents are playing back at you. Fish do not bluff. As a general rule, from time to time, they try to get tricky and just kind of flail around, but in general, fish don't bluff. If the passive or the weak bet, believe it, 9 times in 10, you'll be saving money. You won't be bleeding money, let's say, in the long run. So in many cases, we want to opt for pot control with top pairs and over pairs, and I just showed you guys why. And also in other way ahead, way behind spots, WAWB, way ahead, way behind, instead of value maximization, i.e. sell it when you got it. Now, again, small pots with small hands, big pots with big hands, and I'll probably mention that 45 times before the series out. What's a small hand? Well, small or good hand is top pair or an overpair. Big hands are 2 pair or better, and also nut draws in many cases. It means in Texas Hold'em, 12 to 15 outs or better. So yeah, that's a principle that you really gotta let sink in. Top pair and over pair. It's not a monster, guys. Post flop. It's not. In most cases. And yeah, depending on the pre-flop action, if you're in a 4-bet or 5-bet pot, then your overpair aces is probably good in general. In general. However, if you're in only 2-bet or 3-bet pots, as you've just seen in 2 example hands, if somebody's set mining or even calling or raising light with suited connectors and they actually connect hard with the flop, you may well be an absolute underdog as soon as that flop comes. So yeah, take it in context, but again, top pairs, over pairs, good hands in general, not big hands. So not always, but often you're going to want to play that for pot control, and you're going to want to play your big hands, your flop sets, your flop 2 pair, your occasional flop straight or flush, etc. Yeah, for stacks, not the other way around. Again, don't quote me out of context. In general, it's something that I think will save you guys a lot of money in the long run if you adhere to this one very simple principle. Again, small pots, small hands, big pots, big hands. What's a big hand? 2 pair or better. So, low stakes red flags. What are those? Well, any min raise, as we already saw in the example hand, is in general pretty strong. Not always, but against especially fish and novice players, the min raise or the limp raise is a big red flag that you should definitely watch out for, as well as the so-called out of position float line. What is that? It's basically when somebody, let's say on the flop, checks it, you raise or you make a bet in position, and then that player calls. Okay, the turn comes, and the villain or your opponent there bets into you on the turn. So it's basically a check call on the flop and then a bet or a push on the turn that equals serious strength 9 times in 10. So yeah, I've kind of given you guys a couple of examples here, but in that spot, be able to fold those top pairs and over pairs. It's very important. You'll see me definitely not fold those top pairs and over pairs versus those lines, and then you guys can maybe just tally it up and see how I do over time. in the cases where I don't adhere to this rule. Right? It's a big red flag. Again, 9 times in 10 at the low stakes at least. So good. Do not semi-bluff if your opponent can't fold. Take the free card versus the stations and value bet them when you complete. By and large, semi-bluff is when you've already seen the flop, you kind of know where you stand, because the flop, of course, as you guys all know, very much determines your hand both in Hold'em and in Omaha. And so, yeah, you're sitting there on the flop, let's say in Texas Hold'em, and you've got, again, here the 78 suited, right? You've got the open-ended straight draw and the flush draw, and you give yourself the full 15 outs. So you don't have a made hand, but you have a huge amount of equity just based on your draw alone, right? So your 15 out flops are going to give you, if you were to push on the flop every single time you got 15 clean outs, approaching infinity, you're going to have 54% equity of completing that draw either on the turn or the river, and that's huge. It's absolutely huge. Actually, with those 15 out draws, you're ahead of most top pairs and top kickers. But again, guys, guess what? Never take my word for it, or any other coach for that matter, but ask for the proof. And where's the proof? Well, Poker Stove, by and large. We're holding 87 suited, 8 of spades, 7 of spades, and our opponent has big slick suited of hearts. Pre-flop matchup, 2 cards versus 2 overcards versus 2 undercards, very typically a 60-40 split. Another point I'd like to make is that under pairs versus over pairs is very often a 20-80 split. And anytime you have a laced hand, for example, let's do Ace-Jack, just as an example, versus Queen-10, why not? This is a so-called laced hand, so Ace-Queen, Jack-10 is also at about 60-40, depending on the suitedness, etc. But that'll give you a general orientation concerning your matchups. Good. So here we go with the old 8 of spades, 7 of spades, and again we're at 40% pre-flop if we were to push versus the ace, king of hearts. Alright, flop comes 5-6 of our suit and the king. So he gets top pair, top kicker, and we flop our 15 out flush and open-ended straight draw. Right, so what does that mean? Any 4 and any 9 is going to make our open-ended straight draw, and any spade is going to make our flush, but we have to take out 2 spades. We have to discount 2 outs because they're included in the straight draw out set. So again, look guys, this guy flops top pair, top kicker, and is behind us on the flop, behind us. We don't have anything but a draw, and we're ahead of him, right? 56%. I hope that's shocking for a lot of you guys. That's the strength of the draw, and that's where you should be getting active with those big flops. And yeah, problem is, let's say the turn comes and it's a blank, 10 of hearts. What happens to our equity here? Goes straight down the toilet from 56, wouldn't it? 56% to 34% inside of one card. So again, I mean, time to get active is on the flop with those big not necessarily nut, but big draws, 12 outs, 15 outs plus. Another good one is maybe something that a lot of guys don't realize. So again, this is Dylan for mybet.com, wishing you all the best, and definitely best of luck at your next storm table.